So you may actually want to become a doctor in Australia, but here's a breakdown of the actual cost it takes after you finished med school, after you finish your years as junior doctor. This is about how you actually get onto a training program to specialize in your area of medicine that you're interested in. So if you don't understand it now, in Australia, you finish med school and then you work as a junior doctor, but after that, you actually have to find a specialty to apply to specialize in, and that's your area of interest in medicine. So you're not allocated a specialty at the end of medical school, you actually have to apply to your specialization of choice. It's different to around the world where you might actually already be matched into a specialty at the end of medical school. This is a little bit different. So let's go ahead and break down the costs of one particular specialty that it cost a few different people to get into. This is kind of interesting because I don't think many people have spoken about this or have an idea about actual costs that lead to specialization as a doctor. So this is talking about different courses you have to do, different exams you have to pass, different conferences you have to go to, publishing, papers, everything like that. How much does it cost to get onto a training program? Let's break it down. So this is an article that's called The Costs and Challenges of the CV for SET Urology training positions. And it interviews a few different people who just got onto the urology program. This article was published early this year or last year. It's part of the ANZ Journal of Surgery. It's an extension of RACS, the Australian College of Surgeons. And you can essentially see how much it costs to get into urology training. So they interviewed about 11 people who just got onto the program, and they break down the different themes and different costs and everything like that. So the main thing that really stood out to me in this article is that this sentence just here: the average cost of each trainee who gained acceptance was $50,779 over 3 years. And that's not before they got onto urology. That's not during urology training. That is literally just building up your CV to get onto the training program. And now a lot of people would actually pay slightly more than this, slightly less than this, because it's the average. So that's kind of a scary thing to just, conceptualize. If you think how much money you're earning, how much money you're spending, this is just to, put yourself into a position to get the job. So that's kind of an interesting thing to take into consideration. The main thing they did in this paper was a qualitative analysis of some semi-structured interviews. And as I said, they interviewed about 11 people, and then they broke it down by thematic analysis into a few different sections. They spoke about passion or commitment, researching pathways, challenges, and acceptance success. So they also characterize the different costs of the things to build up your CV and everything. So let's go through a few main highlights of the article, and we'll just pick out a few different sections to put it into perspective about how this might work for you. Obviously, not everyone's going to do urology training. There'll be differences between surgical specialties, physician specialties, GP, everything like that. But I think this is just probably on the higher end to put it into perspective of what people would pay to get onto training programs. It may even be up the very high end. I'm not too sure about everything in terms of how much people pay, in terms of expenses and, exams and interviews and courses, but it's probably likely that if there's a very tight bottleneck for that specialty in terms of getting on, they might only let a couple people on each year or so. The more likely you are that you need to do a whole lot of stuff to make yourself a better candidate to apply and actually be selected onto that training program. But anyways, let's just go through a few highlights for this. So to put it into perspective, the amount of people that are in medical schools in Australia is obviously getting more and more. In 2017, there were almost 3,500 students that graduated. So 3,500 new doctors that were local graduates in Australia. And that number increased to slightly over 3,500 in 2020. And that's going to just keep increasing given now is 2024. And if you think about that, there are 3,500 doctors, probably almost 4,000 now if you're talking about 2024. But I mean, if you just contrast that from the amount of people who are actually doctors to the amount of people who actually get selected onto urology training, that amount is only 16 to 27, and that's been pretty stable between 2010 and 2022. So that's such a small fraction compared to the amount of doctors that, you know, produced each year after they graduate from medical school. So obviously a tight bottleneck that you have to, you know, try really hard to be competitive and to get onto. So that's just one thing to take into account. The urology training program has a few different things, like all different specialties. They structure it into, you know, the CV component, they need referees, and they also do an interview from the panel before they actually select you onto the program. So the main thing that's going to be a rate limiting step is passing the certain exams that you need to. I think they say, yeah, up here, you need to pass the GSSE and you need to pass the clinical examination. And then you also need to have done a few rotations in surgery and urology, which are specified in the actual application handbook that they publish on their website. And then they break down the application in terms of your CV, your referees, and an interview. So that's just the way that's broken down for urology. It's going to be different for every single specialty. Now, in terms of building up your CV, there's a few different requirements and different sections. I guess it's really good that they highlighted here that the estimated cost of applying for a urology residency position within the US was almost 7,000 to 10,000 US dollars, which is, you know, in terms of Australian dollars, that's 11,000 to 16,000. And there was nothing available for Canada and the UK. It's quite a high cost to apply to a urology training program. I'm not sure if that takes into account, you know, the cost of, you know, doing all the conferences and everything, or if it's just the application fee, because that would be staggeringly high. Potentially that might be a number to compare to ours, but I'm not too sure. I haven't, you know, seen those figures and where they've come from. So this is kind of good. It breaks down how the actual points are allocated for your CV. Now there's a few different sections here. They've changed slightly over the year. So we've got two columns here. This is, you know, for the 2024 intake on the right-hand side, and this is still slightly earlier. So they've just reduced some of the points and, you know, altered the allocation of them. But the qualifications has remained the same. There's 15 points on offer. For medical or technical professional development activities, there's 20, but now 15 for the 2024 intake. For the non-medical or technical professional development activities, 15 earlier, but now it's reduced to 10. That's essentially just like conferences or like courses you would do to, you know, it might be like professional development, or it might be like leadership, or, you know, cultural awareness, or it might be, you know, some sort of like professionalism course or something like that. There's a whole bunch that you can do that may cost money, may cost, you know, not much at all, may actually be free. There's a few different places you can try to source these courses, but, you know, PMCV, you might go through a different college, they might offer some sort of things. It's specified in the application where you have to do it for a certain number of hours, and they, you know, quantify in terms of CPD points, like your continual professional development points and hours. So all you need to understand is that you need to spend time doing stuff to either go to conferences or to build yourself up as an overall well-rounded doctor. They allocate points for research, presentations, prizes, awards, and leadership, and also for an origin of rural or regional background. They total it up to 105 points or 110 points, depending on what year you were applying. So let's go through the actual results of this study. As I said, they interviewed 11 people, and the average age of them was about 30 years old. They mostly did undergraduate medicine, but one person did postgraduate medicine. And then they did some interviews that were about an hour's long. The main thing to go through is how much each section of that CV that we highlighted just before cost to, you know, get your points on the board, essentially. In terms of the qualification section, I mean, qualifications might consist of doing a PhD, a master's, a diploma, things of that nature. So your medical degree is not counted, your undergraduate degree is not counted. It's all additional study in terms of that. So if you look at this, they say 50% had a higher qualification, with 25% of these not yet complete. That might be that the thesis wasn't completed or something like that. They had just started the course. So the cost of people trying to improve their qualification sections for this CV ranged from $9,000 to $35,000. That's insane. Like, people would pay up to $35,000 to get qualifications to, you know, improve their points for this section. So it can be quite substantial. And I know some courses can cost anywhere between $10,000 to $20,000. And, you know, it's just for a few points. So there is one course that a lot of people do that costs about $20,000. And I think that's like the diploma of surgery or something similar to that name. I think that translates to about 2 points or 2 to 4 points in terms of the application. So a lot of money for not a lot of points, but it is beneficial in terms of a lot of other ways. For the medical and technical aspects, this is all to do with courses and conferences. So pretty much most people have developed their CV component with 7 to 13 courses attended, and $5,000 to $20,000 were the range of costs for that. The majority of people spent more than $10,000 on this section. In terms of the non-medical or non-technical, that was between $1,000 and $5,000. And just to note that this is pretty much over a period of 3 years of what they're basing these costs over. So then it goes on to the publication section. Not many people had to pay for, you know, publishing their articles or their papers. Maybe there were some grants, or maybe the senior doctors helped out with funding it, or the hospital helped out. I'm not too sure. The cost of this section was about $300 per year. So if you do it over a 3-year period, it's just under $1,000. The presentations actually come with a bit of a cost, not from doing the presentation, but the main thing is the travel, accommodation, and conference fees. So if you have to present something and it's not in your country, potentially it might be overseas, let's say it's in Paris, then you've got to travel to Paris, which is a massive flight. You've got to stay in Paris for your accommodation, and then you have to attend the conference at Paris. Now, you don't just get to go there for free because you're, you know, presenting an article or a paper. It actually costs quite a bit of money. So this is about $7,000 to $19,000 in terms of your costs. Prizes, awards, and leadership didn't really have much of a financial impact. And yeah, then they broke it down into a few different themes, which we'll go through now. But just to put that into perspective, the big things that cost a lot of money are your qualifications, because often that's done with organizations like a university. The medical and technical component for courses can be quite, you know, substantial in terms of the financial costs, and also the presentations, not because you have to give the presentations, but because of the nature of where they are. They happen all over the world. It might be in Japan or, you know, Bali or Paris or the USA, wherever it is. If you're, you know, going to present a paper, you're going to have to travel there, sort out your accommodation, and actually pay the conference fees to attend. These conferences are big events. They're often held at, you know, huge locations that often have very big costs for the college or the organization to fund those and to actually host those events. So yeah, they have to remunerate that cost in some way. And one of the ways in which they do, other than sponsors and stuff, is by getting the participants or the attendees to pay. So now let's go on to the thematic analysis. And this just breaks up the interviews into a few different sections in terms of highlighting which parts were the most burdensome on their finances, and yeah, take that into consideration. Let's go ahead. So there are a few different sections in this article that it's probably worth reading yourself just to get a full grasp of everything. But we'll just highlight a few different things that the applicants actually said. And, you know, they're just some like word for word quotes that they, you know, spoke about in terms of the whole process and how they actually felt during it. So we won't go through absolutely everything. The discussion and, you know, more, you know, to do with the article can just be read on your own terms. I'll put a link in the description so that you can access that if you want to. I don't know if it's completely free to access or not, but just click on the article. Hopefully you can access it and go from there. So these are a couple of things that the trainees actually said You know, if we just focus on this dedication of free time, this was under the theme of passion or commitment. So let's just focus on what trainee E said, which was, yeah, unfortunately I had to use annual leave. We only have limited leave, so they go pretty quick, and you basically had to use available annual days off and then use your annual leave. And then you basically had to speak to different units sometimes to work an extra weekend if you had to present on a weekday, if that's what it was. So pretty much what they're saying is that, you know, you might have time off as it is, but it's not really time off. You have to use that wisely. I don't know if, you know, people have much sympathy for that. Of course, you have to have a life around medicine and around any job that is, but if people are going to work harder than you and use their time off more efficiently, then the result is that they're probably going to be in a better position than you are if you're not using that time to do work things. On the other hand, if that's what it takes, then it's going to probably detract a lot of people. And do you want people who have a well-balanced life, or do you want people who just work 24/7? And different specialties will value different things and be more onerous in terms of the tasks that you need to do in order to present yourself as a successful applicant. So you can look at that two different ways, but it is a little bit tricky to conceptualize. If you're feeling burnt out, you obviously need to take time off, but if you can make it work so that you spend your time off doing things to help push you in the right direction, then that's good, but also balance that with stuff that you're interested in that's not work related, or that's not, you know, improving your CV and stuff like that. Let's look at the health advocacy. So these are some of the challenges. So trainee G said, my weight from the time that I was becoming an unaccredited reg to now was like 10 kilos higher. And you attribute that to sort of loss of, you know, not exercising, not playing sport, which I used to do, so the work-life balance has suffered. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. So anecdotally, people always talk about developing reg bod, which is essentially a body of a registrar is like someone who is like not exercising, who's not eating well, who's not like looking after themselves in terms of their own personal health, but dedicating a whole lot of time to your job. And, you know, so certainly at some points you slip into reg bod mode where you're just work 24/7. You're not like meal prepping, you're not exercising, you're not eating right. You're just like essentially just programmed for work. And that's kind of true to a certain extent. Making sure there's like barometers either way, you know, that if you slip into this part too much, then you can just pull back, do more exercise, eat a little bit better. I certainly think that if you prioritize your own health, you're actually going to perform better, and, you know, you're not actually going to burn out as easier and all those sort of things. I think you just feel better when you're exercising, when you're looking after yourself. So definitely don't neglect your own personal health to prioritize this, but at some stages it's kind of inevitable, and you just need to have like this push and pull sort of mindset with it. Let's go through one more quote before we finish up, but the acceptance success theme, let's talk about free time. So yes, it's definitely better back than it was. Training is intense, but I think there's more of a time right now that when trying to get on as an SRMO. I think what they're trying to say, trainee C, is that it wasn't great, you know, a few years back, and it's sort of better now, but it's still hard work. You still actually have to do a lot to get onto a training program. As the other trainee said earlier on for a different section, you have to use your time off efficiently. If you don't use your time off effectively to like chip away at some of the things that you need to build up over time, then the amount of stuff that you need to do almost seems insurmountable, and you won't actually achieve it, and maybe you won't, you know, do as best as you probably could have. So like anything, chip away at it over time. You probably won't see the massive benefits initially, but, you know, over a 6-month period, over a 12-month period, then you can step back and you say like, oh wow, like I've actually achieved a whole lot. So it's just, you know, head down, focus on the little things, and the big things work itself out in the end. But yeah, there's a whole lot more to this article, definitely worth reading a bit more if you can. But that's just one little snippet in terms of a particular surgical training program, how to get on, how much it actually costs to put yourself in a position that makes yourself like an attractive candidate to be selected. And you might have to do these things over a few different years to try to put yourself in that position. Some colleges, I'm not sure how much it costs to get onto GP training versus physician training versus like a critical care stream, etc. So they're probably more expensive, anecdotally just for the surgical streams, but that doesn't take into account a lot of the time and effort that you may have to put in for every other specialty that you're trying to get onto. So take your time, have a look at what the specialty actually requires of you before you apply. And I guess if anything else, this just gives you a little snippet into how much it actually costs to get onto the program. Do your courses as well, or other qualifications like a master's or a PhD or some sort of diploma that you may actually need to get enough points to be able to apply. It's worth taking into consideration that these points, people don't apply with full points for the whole application, and that CV component is just a certain portion of it. They do take into account your CV, but also your referees, and then of course the interview component as well. And every college is going to be structured a little bit differently. But yeah, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I think this is probably pretty useful and pretty eye-opening for somebody who has never even considered the costs of actually getting onto a training program. They might just focus on the specific requirements, but not attach a monetary value to that. So hopefully that opens your eyes up. But yeah, definitely something to take into consideration before you start choosing your specialty of choice. Let's leave it there. See you next time.